This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 26th of July 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the historian, author and screenwriter Alex von Tunzelmann. Then,
we base every single design decision that we make on the underlying story and the underlying design principles, which are a direct result of the narrative, of the story.
Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi speaks to designers from Tel Art Studio about their work at Osaka Expo 2025. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First though, here's the news. Thai-Cambodian border fighting has entered a third day as new flashpoints emerge. Both sides claim self-defence and urge diplomacy. This is the deadliest clash in 13 years, killing at least 30 and displacing over 130,000 people. Thailand's Navy reports coastal clashes in Trat today. That's more than 100 kilometres from the main border conflict zones. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and US President Trump say ceasefire talks with Hamas have collapsed, accusing militants of unwillingness to compromise. Israel is now weighing alternative strategies amid rising starvation and devastation in Gaza. And US President Donald Trump is in Scotland today, where he plans to play golf at his local properties. He also said he'll meet UK Prime Minister Starmer and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, whom he described as a highly respected woman. And finally, if you'd like more detail, and let's face it, who wouldn't, about our editor-in-chief Andrew Tuck's tortilla-padded gusset, do read our Monocle Weekend Edition. You can subscribe for free at monocle.com/minute. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm joined now in the studio by historian, author and screenwriter Alex von Tunzelmann. Alex, would you stuff your gusset with a tortilla?
Well, I mean, my goodness, what a way to start, Georgie, this time on a Saturday morning. I do actually sympathise with this because I'm actually a rather poor cyclist, to my great shame. But having occasionally done horse riding, particularly if you sort of do it on holiday for several days at a time, I am sympathetic to the need for a little extra help in the gusset department.
Absolutely. Well, I am pony club girl through and through. But luckily, I've always had my own padding. It's attached.
Yes. Very efficient. Yes.
But talking of cycles, there's been a lot of stories this week about how the sound of summer is the sound of stolen lime bikes tweeting.
Hackney bird song, they call it around my area of town, yes.
Extraordinary.
Quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I know they put this sort of beeping in to stop these communal bikes being stolen, is the idea, because, if you sort of stop paying for them, they make this annoying beep. It turns out the kids don't care. I mean, they're just quite happy to go around with the thing beeping. So, this is sort of now just the soundtrack to our summer. And yes, I rather wish they'd find another way to immobilise the bikes, I have to say.
There is another soundtrack to our summer, or rather a refrain to our summer. And one man in particular just wishes we would shut up. Those are the words Jeffrey Epstein, the man who will not die. 6 years after his death, he is more in the headlines than ever. This is a huge story, and Donald Trump just wants it to go away.
He does, and this is rather fascinating for long-time Trump media watchers, of whom I am one, in that I think he's somebody who's incredibly adept, actually, at manipulating the media, and somebody who's been really good at making things go away. I mean, if you look at his sort of rap sheet, felonies, being found liable for sexual assault, all sorts of really appalling things that would have sunk the career of any other imaginable politician. And he's just kind of, it's been water off a duck's back. The guy's just carried on. And he's always been able to make it all go away. And what's really fascinating about this is that he's trying all those usual tricks that he has, and nothing is working. This is something that I think resonates with his base more than any other story, because, they've been so focused on, if you look at the hardcore of his base, who've been very focused on QAnon, on idea, pretty bonkers ideas about sort of, elite paedophile circuits abusing children. And they sort of had it all around Hillary Clinton and a pizza restaurant in Washington in a rather bizarre way. But this Epstein story is pressing some of those buttons and people just won't let it go.
And I suppose the mistake he made was that before he came into power, he said, we will get everything released, we will tell you everything. And now, well, the stories are that his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has said, you are in the files, and suddenly the files are not being released. Now, there's all sorts of legal proceedings in place right now to try and make that happen.
Yes, and I mean, this is probably going to run and run for that reason, to Trump's great distress, no doubt, because he really wishes people would just stop talking about this and keep saying it's no big deal. The thing is, of course, there's no way to make a conspiracy theory go away by saying to people, don't worry, there's no evidence, it's no big deal. And he knows that because
they would say that, wouldn't
exactly, because that is what happens. The lack of evidence for the proposition is evidence of a cover-up. That's how conspiracy theories work. And Trump knows that because, of course, he's played to it with things like the JFK assassination files that he's been determined to release, and all sorts of, he tried to sort of put this off last week by releasing all these files on Martin Luther King's death and so forth. And actually Martin Luther King's daughter came back and said, now do Epstein. So, that sort of hasn't worked at all. So, we're sort of in a situation, I think it's really quite interesting, where I do think this is going to run and run. And now we're seeing a very disturbing turn in this story, in that the Justice Department representatives presumably on Trump's behalf, are talking again to Ghislaine Maxwell, the one person who is currently in prison for some of these crimes. I mean, of course, Epstein probably would be in prison had he not died in prison in the process of being prosecuted. But, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of some really serious offences, kind of over a 10-year period of aiding and abetting this sexual abuse of underage girls by Epstein, and, using really the fact that she was a woman, the fact that she could lull these girls into a sense of security, actually to further their abuse. And it's pretty horrific if you read any of the sort of documents around this. And now there seems to be, what people are fearing is that with all these conversations with the Justice Department, that there's going to be some sort of deal done for her to say, well, I never saw Trump, he was never involved, and then for a pardon to emerge. Yeah.
I think it's not a stretch at all to imagine that she will be out before the end of the year.
No, I don't think it is either. And I mean, she's, I believe, in her early 60s. She's theoretically going to be out of prison when she's 80. Why wouldn't she do a deal?
Absolutely. Well, of course, this has been taken up in all sorts of different corners of the media, and this is what we need is for the media, but also particularly satirical comedy, to hold these people to account. Now, this is something that Stephen Colbert has been doing for years with his Late Show, and we know now that his show has been cancelled. We spoke about this last week, but this story is so much bigger than that. It goes back to the heart of this deal with Paramount.
Yes, which has been a massive deal. So this is kind of the outcome of a lawsuit that was pretty frivolous that Paramount has settled with Trump for effectively sort of, a very corrupt deal. I think one of the sort of hallmarks, particularly of this second Trump term, is the complete openness of the bribery and corruption that's going on. Yeah. There's not even really an attempt to hide it. But what this has coincided with, which is very interesting, is Paramount also paying much more money, actually, than they have to Trump, $1.5 billion, to Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park, which, popular long-running animated series, extremely scatological, very much not directed at children, very much adult animation, that has been running for sort of, donkey's years. I mean, it's actually just started its 27th season, so that tells you sort of how long. And Paramount have basically bought the back catalogue to that, the rights to show all of that, and also new episodes. And then the first new episode came out this week and was sort of extraordinary. I mean, I think, Georgina, you've watched possibly all of it. I've watched some clips from it.
I mean, it is extraordinary in that it's called Sermon on the Mount, and it has Jesus in it for a start.
Right.
But it has Donald Trump in it. Do they use his name? I can't remember. But what they do is they don't use an animation of him. They use a photograph of his face. And they don't really try and do his voice. What they also feature a lot, or almost don't feature because it's so tiny, is his penis. So there's a lot of kind of small dick jokes. And what I have to say about this is, yes, it's funny, which I don't usually find South Park. It's also kind of juvenile. It's not particularly clever.
I mean, it's the opposite of clever. It's about the lowest barrel scraping level. But on the other hand, I think what's sort of fascinating about that, and what has kind of made that go viral and be, you know, and have people kind of hooting with laughter, is just the fact of doing that about Trump when you know how much that will get to him. I mean, that's sort of the point, right? It's kind of laser targeted. We know he's incredibly sensitive at issues like this. It's kind of, I mean, you know, years, for instance, of after I think it was Graydon Carter, the editor of Vanity Fair, who said Trump had tiny hands. And apparently for years, Trump would send him pictures of his hands going, look, normal size, you know, and sort of, so I mean, God knows, on the manhood department, it's, you know, obviously a far more insecure area of, you know, of life.
But I mean, what is extraordinary about this story is going back to what we were saying about The Late Show and this whole deal with Paramount, is that Paramount have bought the rights to South Park. And this has gone out under their watch. This company that was so desperate to do a deal and paid off all of this money for this frivolous lawsuit.
Yes, absolutely.
What's going on there?
Well, I mean, it looks like the South Park lads are pretty much out to sink that. And I mean, the episode is kind of about that, right? There's a whole load of jokes in there about we settled with, you know, we've settled, but now we have to do pro-Trump propaganda. And then the episode ends with this kind of extraordinary AI advert of you know, a sort of hyper-realistic Trump walking through the desert, again in a sort of rather sort of symbolic of Jesus's walks in the desert, stripping off his clothes. And, you know, he's shown to be sort of enormously fat and pale under his clothes. And then, I mean, I don't know how to describe this on the radio. I'm sort of, you know, his penis pops up with eyes on it and begins to talk. And apparently the reason that the South Park creators did that was that they had a 4-day argument with the executives at Paramount that said, you have to blur out the penis. You may not show this thing. And they said, no, it's a character. We've put eyes on it. That means you can't blur it out. So then apparently they won on this point of artistic license. And therefore this happened. And it is, I mean, as you say, like, this is not clever, biting satire. This is about the lowest playground taunt. It's the fact that you know how Trump will react to it. And the White House have extraordinarily reacted to this. I mean, the thing to do was never mention it. And yet the White House came out with this kind of line about, oh, you know, President Trump doesn't care about fourth-rate comedy shows. He's focused on the American, you know, all of this. And it's like, my goodness, where is your media management? Don't mention it, because then you've turned it into a story. You know, like now we're sort of, White House denies that, you know, South Park, you know, or slams it, or all of this. You know, it's that extraordinary thing of actually not being able to resist some sort of comment on it, which of course has meant that the story is now running into days.
Yeah. And of course, what Trump wants people to focus on right at this very moment is his trip here to Britain. So he's in Scotland. He's going to have a look at his golf courses, play a few rounds. He's going to meet with Keir Starmer. He's going to meet with Ursula von der Leyen. And I'm wondering what kind of a reception he's getting, because a lot of the local people do like the fact he's brought employment to the place. However, there's been environmental degradation. And of course, there's a rump of Brits that just can't stand the man.
He's enormously unpopular in Britain, and particularly, I would say, in Scotland, actually, which is kind of, you know, in terms of British polling, tends to lean more left, tends to be kind of, you know, more anti that sort of thing. And I think also a lot of Scots, you know, who are quite sort of patriotic and so forth about Scotland, feel that Trump kind of, you know, coming over and claiming large parts of it as golf courses, that's not a particularly popular thing, you know, for sort of, I mean, Trump had a Scottish mother, so he sort of has this sense of, you know, of a Scottish identity. But I mean, you know, they are not actually terribly receptive to that. I mean, of course, there may well be some Scots who welcome this, but I think very much a minority. And I mean, certainly from what I've seen of the news reports, I think, I mean, they're doing, you know, the police and so forth, obviously everybody's doing their absolute best to keep him away from protesters, but protesters there are, for sure. And I think this is going, last time he was at a golf course, there was, you know, in Turnberry, I think is his main golf course in Scotland. He has others. There was like a low-flying paraglider over the golf course. There were people turning up with extremely rude signs, which again, having already shocked sort of listeners already, we won't go into the detail of what were held up. But, you know, let's just say that the Scots sort of have a reputation of being quite forthright and a bit sweary, and they certainly lent into that last time. Yeah. So, you know, so this, I think, we will expect some sort of reaction. And I can imagine that actually there's going to be an official state visit, we now know, from the 17th to the 19th of September. And then Trump is going to meet with King Charles, and that's going to be a sort of much more high profile. This is a private visit. So this technically is a low profile visit, although, as you said, he will actually be having some quite significant political meetings. And I think Keir Starmer has tried to play this very, very sensibly. He's obviously tried for a trade deal. He's tried to sort of hold this balance, which I think is very, very difficult, actually, for most European leaders, including Starmer, to sort of, keep America, which is, a very old and venerated ally, on side, while also being aware that their domestic populations are extremely anti-Trump, and that actually Trump is also demanding some things in terms of things like tariffs that are basically impossible.
Yeah,
and very
absolutely.
damaging.
Now, of course, his vice president heading to the Cotswolds. Now, the Cotswolds has become a sort of, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Montecito of Britain. It's known for sort of, David Cameron has a house there, Jeremy Clarkson has a house there, various people. Ellen DeGeneres also has bought there. But what do we think about, she moved there to get away from Trump, and now Vance is following her over.
I mean, really, I know. What a bad investment. Yes, it's a sort of fairly celebrity-heavy part of the UK, very sort of naturally beautiful and very sort of well-heeled. Lots of very pretty villages with nice pubs and this sort of thing, which is why, of course, a lot of people have flocked there. We had Taylor Swift staying there recently. The Beckhams have a big house next to Soho Farmhouse, which is, sort of the hangout destination, that and Estelle Manor. And there's pieces in almost every paper this morning about the charm of the Cotswolds in this respect, for a sort of, the one in the FT sort of says it's, for Americans, it's a little like the Hamptons, only you don't sort of have a 20-year waiting list for the club or have to pay the price of a house to join one. It's more accessible than that. And one can certainly see the appeal of it. But once again, I would imagine, and even though the Cotswolds, of course, this sort of community is probably not the most inclined to riot part of Britain. Again, I would say Vance is somebody who's probably very unpopular with the British public. So apparently he's going to be renting a house there for August, sort of bringing his family and so forth. I would imagine they'll keep rather a low profile.
Just on Ellen DeGeneres and Portia Rossi. So they bought a house there. I think it's I don't know how much it cost, but it's on the market again now for £22.5 million. The reason they're moving apparently is that De Rossi needed a place for horses, and this just doesn't have it. But the interesting thing about this house is the design of it, because it's been completely redone and apparently really architecturally, sensitively, ingeniously transformed, they say, into an enchanting and secluded rural retreat. Now, that's kind of estate agents speak, but there are a lot of pieces about this and how beautifully it has been done. And I've got to say, looking at the pictures, it does look absolutely exquisite. And I think this whole aspect of design, but actually making it into somewhere you want to live rather than an abstract concept of design, is so important. We can all appreciate lovely design, but once it's done specifically for you, that takes it up a whole other level.
It does, but although also then, of course, there is the question of if you then put it on the market for 22 million. Now, anyone who's got 22 million knocking around can, of course, have it completely knocked down and rebuilt in their own personal style that suits them. And I think that can be sometimes, not a problem that I'm currently facing on a sort of historian's wage, but I think that can be a problem at the high end of the property market, that actually, yes, absolutely. It's so exquisite and wonderful to have something built to your personal specifications, but will anyone else want it in exactly that way is such an interesting question. So do you then, perhaps if you sort of have the wealth of these people, you don't particularly mind if you lose a few million here or there, who cares? This is the cost of your living. But one does wonder the market for that, whether you then want to move into Ellen DeGeneres' house or whether you actually want your own.
Yeah, I've got to say I've been ruined for property forever by the fact that I had this wonderful privilege to build my own home. This is back in Zimbabwe, and so did it exactly as I wanted it. So it had a wraparound veranda, it had an internal courtyard, big, all sorts of lovely things that just were, specific to what we wanted at the time. Outdoor showers, that kind of thing.
It sounds like my dream home.
and that's the thing, is it was my dream home, and now I live in a terrace in London. It's a very lovely place, but it's not the house that I designed.
No.
And it's very difficult to go back, I think, once once you've done that. And so that is ultimately where I think I'm headed once again. But I don't want to leave the capital, and I think it's quite difficult to find a place to build within London.
Very difficult, I would say. I mean, there are, of course, there are brownfield sites in London. There are things you can do. And I do think we have seen people do that. And I've been interested to see on certain, you see kind of really decrepit houses, and then a few years later, some wonderful thing pops up, a sort of, a new thing pops up in that space. We do have pretty restrictive planning laws, which, in some ways is good, in some ways is bad, is a bit of a double-edged sword. And I think it is something that you see more, when you go to, I certainly notice more in American cities, is that there seems to be a bit more kind of leeway to knock things down and rebuild. Whereas I think in Britain, we're very attached to our sort of largely Victorian 1930s housing stock. And it's quite difficult, actually, to get permission to change that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about design, because the Global Osaka Expo 2025 runs until the middle of October, and it brings together nearly 150 countries and 25 international organisations to explore solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges. To learn more about the art and strategy behind pavilion design, Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi spoke with the creative minds behind the Netherlands and Philippines pavilions, both from international design studio Tell Art.
We are a story-led design studio, and we create immersive and multisensorial interactive experiences. We approached the design of the building and the guest experience holistically. And that means that all design decisions for the building, for the guest experience, the media, the material, the light, the colors, the sound, all of the interactions, they were made based on the underlying strategy and story.
Thank you. So how do you absorb the stories that countries have and express them as a visitor experiences in pavilions?
We are a story-led design studio. So what we start with is we do deep research and we immerse ourselves in the subject matter that we're treating. And that subject matter treats or ranges from the story of a country in an expo context, immersive and interactive exhibitions around emerging technologies like downstream implications of artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example. We base every single design decision that we make on the underlying story and the underlying design principles, which are a direct result of the narrative, of the story. And an expo context is an international stage, and historically expo is an opportunity for countries to position themselves as forward-thinking nations and to show their latest innovations and technologies. But now expos are more and more about expressing what you stand for as a country and what your core values are, what your national story is, and how you position yourself in an international context within an international community. And you could really question what the relevance of an expo event is nowadays, because we can look all that stuff up on the internet. But if you look at the current situation in the world now, with political polarization and global conflict, I strongly believe that coming together, and it's very important to come together. And I really see it as an exercise of soft power in that context.
So Pim, what about the Philippine pavilions? Were there any challenges in designing that visitor experience?
One of the challenges always when you tell a story is, I could tell it here to you, but once a guest is there, you don't really control how they are going to perceive the story. So one of the things that we often have to think about is, where are you? Like, you're at a busy expo. You want to see multiple pavilions. What is going on around you? So how do you set yourself apart so that maybe you feel more relaxed? We paid a lot of attention to the entrance of the Philippines. If you see a picture of the facade, it is almost like an embrace. So you hear the music, and the music isn't like banging loud music. It's music from the Philippines' nature, the natural environment. So it's as if you're walking into the Philippines itself. And then you see this beautiful, large animation video. First thing that you have to do there is stand and listen to the story. Like, there's a music. So we see that as almost like a grounding moment. I guess we strongly believe that how you set up what you're about to experience is already a design on itself. So I think that's something we took a lot of care to think about. How do we prime people for the right mindset to be open to the story that we're telling?
Thank you. So let me ask about pavilion sustainability. Dutch Pavilion is scheduled to be relocated to Awaji Island near Osaka after the Expo. Liz, how do you consider in design process that pavilion building would continue to be used after the Expo?
Yeah, considering the fact that Expo is a temporary event, it was always the intention to design a pavilion that could be repurposed. And we refer to it as the pavilion's legacy. Yeah, our approach and our design decisions all were in line with that ambition. The pavilion elements, structural elements, are all marked with a QR code that explains how the pavilion is constructed, but also points back at material passport called Madaster. And this is developed with our architect partner, Rao. So all of the materials, the modular approach towards designing the pavilion, make it possible to give that pavilion a longer life. Yeah, that legacy element has been an ambition from the very start of the project. But at the same time, the pavilion can be built taking into account that it could eventually have a very different function. You design for those spaces to be multi-purpose.
Thank you, Liz. I hear the Philippine Pavilion we also shipped back to the Philippines after the Expo. Pim, what do you think about your approach to sustainability of Philippines Pavilion?
I think there's two ways to approach it. One is, in normal architecture, you have typologies. So you understand this is a residential building, this is a museum, right? We have to understand the architecture. In an expo context, you need to almost recognize the country. It's oh, this is the Philippines. But you also need to start understanding a story. So I think that's the first sort of architectural challenge. Secondly, I think this is something that we are really proud of. You, as a design team, set out principles before you start. So one of our principles was using upcycled materials. Another one was to repurpose the things that we could to be brought back to the Philippines. And it's going to be in the National Gallery. I think that's something to be both proud of as a country, because you're leading in more of a sustainability way, showing, hey, we're building something not just for the Expo. So this is also an opportunity for people to be able to visit it. I guess it's also an inclusion story.
That was Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi at Osaka Expo 2025. Now, still with me in the studio is Alex von Tunzelmann. We were talking about design and building things, and apparently you can now build your own teeth.
Yes, this is a story I've been fascinated with. It's in the New Scientist at the moment. It's a story about how, and I found this quite fascinating from several points of view. The idea is, in the future, we will not need implants dentally or replacement teeth or dentures or anything else. Scientists are kind of on the verge of we will just be able to regrow human teeth. Now, probably not just sort of spontaneously. We'll need some sort of treatment for that. And there's kind of three different methods for this. One is which you sort of start with stem cells and embryonic cells. One is which you fool adult cells into thinking that they are embryonic cells. Because, of course, we all do grow teeth at some point. And the other of which is about sort of inhibiting various things that stop that from happening. So there's lots of different approaches. But actually, it's one of those interesting scientific stories where the tech is there, the funding is the issue. And, the thing is about dental funding is that absolutely this will have a cosmetic application, but cosmetic, dentures and implants are already really quite good. So how much funding is there for that? And again, of course, a lot of people who do lose all their teeth and would really benefit from this are not necessarily the wealthy people who could pay for a sort of full mouth of regrown teeth. So this is one of those stories. They say we're about 10 years away from probably the first biological implant tooth. But it would probably be happening an awful lot quicker if there was a more lucrative market for it.
Absolutely. Now, from there, I just feel like we have to mention Nicki Minaj. This is not a compulsion that often grabs me, but you have pointed out this story to me, and I just can't stop thinking about it, and the fact that I think I'm probably completely incapable of doing what it is that she's done, and it's a challenge that's gripping the world. Tell us more.
It is. It's a big piece in the New York Times about it. It's a TikTok trend, doing the Nicki Minaj, and it actually dates back to one of her videos from 2013. So, it almost doesn't feel new. It's just that it's caught fire now. So what you need to do, the Nicki Minaj pose, is a one-legged squat where you cross the other leg over the knee.
Okay, I'm going to try and do this. So I'm going to go into a squat
try and do it in
now.
the studio. So you go into a squat. And
presumably
then
I'm not allowed to hold on to the table.
No, well, maybe when you're trying it out, hold on to the table.
Okay, I'm in a squat.
And one leg crosses over the other, over the knee.
Yeah.
So the ankle is on the knee. Yeah, there you go. Yes, wobbling.
Yeah.
Now, okay, very good. Georgina's doing it for the listeners at home. She is doing it, quite wobbly. Nicki, of course, gets much lower, very close to the ground. She also does it wearing the highest heels you can possibly find.
Now you have to do this too.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'm doing it too.
Yeah.
Now, and also, not only does one do it in the highest pair of stilettos or, whatever that one can find. Oh, my goodness, I'm wobbling now. But one must then do it in some very improbable way. So we have, for instance, the singer Sierra doing it on a pile of dumbbells that she's sort of stacked up on their ends. We have some extraordinary gymnast doing it on a pile of wine bottles going up to a sort of pyramid. I mean, so the challenge is, and I think as we've just, I'm afraid, demonstrated, I'm sorry that you can't see this, listeners, it's really quite hard to do, even just in trainers, even not on a pile of very delicate things.
And holding on to the table.
And holding on to the monocle table with a dear life. So, if listeners want to try this at home, all I can say is it's extremely good for your core strength.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, I think you and I need to go and practice now. So let's bring this programme to an end. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thanks also to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan, who was excused from that challenge because she's recovering from a broken ankle, but we will make you do something equally as physically exhausting soon, I'm sure, Mariella. Monocle on Saturday returns at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.